So last night, we saw in some ways the limit of all of our violent crime fighting strategies because, frankly, we see that there were police officers there. There were Westport security officers there. We had an officer who returned fire, but there was still someone who was intent on shooting up an entire crowd of people. And so tragically, we saw 5 people hit. 1 person died. And I think that is an incredible tragedy, one we shouldn't get used to in Kansas City. Not to mention the fact that yesterday we had somebody shot at a police station with 3 children inside the vehicle. So it's rather early in the year for us to start having weekends like this. We've had too many. 25 homicides by this point in the year is something that we should never get used to, and frankly, we're all frustrated. We're all looking for new solutions. In Westport, we've tried some. We vacated the sidewalks to come up with a crime-fighting strategy. We continue to try to have more law enforcement officers there, and frankly, that's not enough, as long as we still have people that are intent on harming others. One thing that I am happy to see is that the Kansas City Police Department has persons of interest in custody from both murders in the last 24 hours. That is a good sign for us, and I hope that they're able to find all others who are involved.
What other strategies do you have to employ at this point? I know that as part of your campaign, this was one of the issues that was highest on your agenda.
You know, I think, frankly, we see that gun violence is a part of all of this. I think there continue to be a lot of people in our community that should not have firearms. And so we have passed legislation already to make sure that we're taking guns out of the hands of domestic violence abusers, out of juveniles. I think we have more work to do in connection with making sure that those who've been convicted of prior crimes aren't allowed to possess. And, frankly, that we're sending people to jail who have committed crimes and offenses. We have a lot of folks that are walking around who, frankly, should not be out on the streets causing further threats. Another thing that we're seeing is that there's lots of retaliation each week in a number of these incidents. I've started attending, and I thank the police department for having weekly shooting reviews where we're looking at every shooting in Kansas City, going through a diagnosis of what are the causes for it and what we can do to try to prevent those in the future. And we'll continue to do that important work ongoing.
And I know you're about to step into budget hearings right now. What is in your budget for next year that might be addressing this as well?
Well, we always have more money for law enforcement. I continue to think that's an important investment, but importantly, it's not just police officers. It also relates to social media analysts to see where some of these beefs start early. It also relates to making sure that we have money for social workers, and we've restored funding, I announced last evening, to a number of programs that reach out to youth for violence prevention. All of these are necessary, but clearly none of them are enough. You know, when I see something like the shooting last night in Westport, particularly when Westport had been a little safer last summer, I'm incredibly frustrated. We need to make sure that every district of our city is safe. Right now, we're not able to do that. And frankly, we all need to continue to work as hard as possible, City Hall, the police department, the prosecutor's office, to make sure we're avoiding these. But no, we shouldn't get used to 5 people shot every night on a weekend night, and frankly, I won't. And we're going to keep coming up with every solution possible. In this budget hearing in a second, you're going to hear lots of people talk about lots of things. Not enough things they talk about will relate to violent crime in this city. And don't get me wrong, I understand there are a lot of reasons and solutions to it, but it needs to be on the forefront of what we think about in Kansas City. Because we can have every nice bell and whistle, every great thing, but if you have 150 people murdered each year, this is going to be a city people don't want to live in, whether they live on the east side, Central City, Northland, anywhere. And it's my job to make sure we fix it, and we will.
So you have money to get more officers in the budget?
We do have more money for officers in the budget. We have 10 right now. We're talking to the police department about how we can get more. I know the police department has applied for a federal grant from the Department of Justice in connection with that. We hope that they're able to receive it. But another thing that we need to do, and I was in Washington a few weeks ago visiting with the Department of Justice, we need to see what cities are actually coming up with novel solutions to violent crime problems. You know, I was talking to somebody this morning who said, why don't you all just think of some way to do it? Look, if we had the answer, we would certainly be doing it. I think that there's not a single strategy, a single approach. But what I do know is that we can't look away from it. You know, in America, we're talking about an epidemic right now. But we've had a violent crime epidemic in Kansas City for years. If we had 150 people that were falling ill from some illness of whatever type, we would probably use every state, local, and federal authority. Right now, we're not doing that. So I also ask my friends in Jefferson City, Governor Parson, our federal prosecutors, and so many others for their assistance with this as well. We have important work to do, and frankly, this is not enough right now.
As you mentioned, there's been a lot of efforts in Westport to make it safer. Are you disappointed that something like this that happened early this morning is another black eye on this?
Yeah, it doesn't work. I mean, it shows that what we're coming up with right now isn't working. And mind you, I think we're taking important steps. Everything is, I guess, a part of what it is we need to do, but at the same time, it does show that that we're not safe enough. And I know the business owners in Westport have worked very hard to make sure that they can provide a safer experience for folks. Usually you have that at least until midnight. I think the challenge we have is in these late night hours, what can we do? But I bring up the Central Police Station shooting for a reason. Outside of a police station, right, someone gets murdered, right? Steps away from lots of law enforcement officers. There is clearly a problem right now, and it's multifaceted. One is the access to firearms that a lot of people who should not have them have. Another part of that problem is that there are folks that are operating with impunity in this city. To think that you can shoot up somebody, right, feet away from police officers, both the incident at the Central Patrol Station and actually in Westport last night, where there are officers and there's security, and there's always a big presence for it, and that continues to me to be a very significant challenge. So I think more than necessarily seeing what it means to one district, it presents a problem for an entire community. And this is a year, by the way, everyone, where we've had, I believe we had a recent homicide in Kansas City, Kansas. We've had homicides this year in other suburbs of this city. And so I think we have a huge problem, one that is at the epidemic level. So I would call on everyone from public health to law enforcement to make sure they're part of this. In terms of solutions, we have more work to do. I'll be visiting with the Westport Business League as well to make sure that we're working with them to continue to enhance security. And, but when I think about it and I think about solutions, another problem I have is how can you make something safer than being right outside a police station, right? You have a bunch of armed law enforcement officers right inside, and there are still 3 children that witnessed a homicide yesterday. That's the sort of thing that's tragic for our community, and it's the sort of thing that frankly speaks to the fact that more of our budget focus, more of our entire focus of things needs to be how we can deter people from being a part of violent crime.
You talked about strategies that have already been implemented. Are there additional strategies that you're looking into to address gun violence?
You know, additional strategies we look into, not only do we have weekly shooting reviews, and by the way, let me describe what they are. We have prosecutors, police, FBI, probation and parole folks who are part of a weekly review of every shooting and what we can do to solve it. I think the deeper concern and problem is what do we do coming out of it, right? How are we actually reaching out to people thereafter? How are we actually sharing information? For me, it's not just enough to say that we have a hunch who did it, but we have to make sure, particularly in a lot of group-level violence, that we're looking to issues like, well, if we know that somebody in this group got shot, are we watching enough other people in the same group to make sure that they're stopping that retaliation? That's a part of what used to exist in our NOVA program, or does exist in our NOVA program. Frankly, I think we need to do better with looking at kind of groups that are agile, right? Gangs aren't frozen, right? And folks that are angry aren't frozen. And we have too many people that are involved in violent crime, both as victims and as assailants, who we might have a hunch might be inclined to hit back, but we're not doing enough to engage those groups, I think, each week and after each incident. I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see, and I know after every shooting, we have law enforcement that goes and asks people, what do you know? And in a lot of those situations, people say, I know nothing. And then we often have health department people who say, what do you know? They still say, I know nothing. We need to find a way to bridge that. And maybe probably the biggest way we can do that is from clearing more homicides. If you don't think anything will happen after somebody shot you, then your remedy is not necessarily to just wait for somebody to find the suspect. It's too often in our community, it's people saying we're going to fire back. And that's the cycle that we need to break. And frankly, that's a cycle we've seen in Kansas City for too long. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.